I'm standing at the kitchen sink watching the sun come up through the window, and my hands are shaking. I'm 75 years old, and I just played a recording I haven't heard in 40 years. My father's voice. I know that sounds dramatic, but God, where do I even start? This is something I never thought I'd talk about, but I need to tell you what happened. Because if you're sitting there feeling like you deserve the treatment you're getting, like maybe it's your fault somehow, I need you to hear my story. My mother grounded me that day in 1984. I was in my 50s. Can you believe that? I'd come home late from work, and she said I was grounded. She was already living with me by then, in my apartment here in Richmond, Virginia, in this gentrifying area where old buildings meet new condos. I had this public housing apartment on the 3rd floor with a view of the street. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Or I thought it was mine. I was wearing my sunny yellow cardigan with pearl buttons that morning she said it. The one that made me feel a little bit like myself on bad days. My mother, I loved her. God knows I did. But she controlled everything. My money, my documents, the title to the apartment. She said she was protecting me, that I wasn't smart enough to handle these things myself. I was a grown woman with a career, but inside that apartment, I became a child again. I believed her. That was the trap, you know? I actually believed that I deserved to be treated like I couldn't think for myself. If you've ever felt that way, if you're nodding your head right now because this sounds familiar, do me a favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, but because there's someone out there who needs to hear this story. Someone who's sitting in their own apartment right now, wondering if they're crazy, if they're imagining things. They need to know they're not alone. My hobby was baking sweet potato pie from my grandmother's recipe. That was the one thing that felt like mine. On Monday nights, I'd cook red beans and rice, and I'd think about my grandmother's hands making that pie. But even that got tied up in my mother's control. She'd criticize how I made it, say I was wasting money on ingredients, that I did everything wrong. And I'd apologize. I'd actually apologize for baking pie the way my grandmother taught me. I had dreams once, real dreams. I wanted to be a seamstress, a real one. Not just someone who fixed things for people. I had this beautiful old Singer sewing machine that my mother inherited from her mother, and she kept it in her room. Not mine. She said I wasn't responsible enough to use it properly. I'd stand in that doorway sometimes, just looking at it, and I'd feel this heaviness in my chest that I couldn't even name back then. Winter in Richmond, the cold keeps you inside and the windows fog up from the warmth of the apartment. I remember so many winters just sitting in that fog, watching the street below, thinking about that Bentley Continental in cream white I used to daydream about. Stupid, right? A 75-year-old woman thinking about fancy cars she'd never own. But that car meant freedom. It meant going somewhere. It meant I didn't have to ask permission. My faith kept me going. I had my worn Bible on the nightstand with my reading glasses beside it, and I'd read it every night. I'd pray that things would get better, that my mother would see me, really see me, for who I was. I prayed a lot. Too much, maybe. I was praying for her to change instead of praying for myself to wake up. The apartment smelled like beans cooking when she told me I was grounded. I'd gotten home at 9 instead of 6 because I'd stopped at the fabric store. Just stopped to look. I didn't even buy anything. But she was waiting at the door, arms crossed. And she said those words like I was 12. You're grounded. No going out for a week? At 53 years old. And I said, okay. I actually said, okay. That's when the sewing machine caught my eye in her room. The door was open, and I could see it sitting there in the corner, dust gathering on the wood. My grandmother had left it to my mother, but it was supposed to come to me. That's what Grandma had said before she died. That machine is for you, baby. You're the one with the hands for it. But my mother kept it. Kept it like she kept everything else that might have given me joy. I remember giving up nursing school for her. That was back in the 60s, when I was still young enough to have time ahead of me. I'd gotten accepted, had the scholarship and everything, but she got sick. Or she said she got sick? Looking back now, I'm not sure what was real and what was performance. But I believed her then. I quit before I even started, moved back home to take care of her. The scholarship went to someone else. The dream went somewhere I couldn't follow it. I remember the day I got that acceptance letter. I was 23, working as a receptionist at a doctor's office, and I'd studied so hard for the entrance exam. When that envelope came, I ran to my mother's house waving it in the air. I was so excited I could barely breathe. This was it. This was my chance to become someone, to have a real career, to build a life that was mine. My mother looked at the letter and smiled. She said she was proud of me. She hugged me and said we'd celebrate with dinner that weekend. For 3 days, I walked on air. I told everyone at work. I started looking at apartments near the nursing school. I bought textbooks from a secondhand store and started reading ahead. Then she called me, said she'd been to the doctor, that there was something wrong with her heart, said she needed surgery, needed someone to take care of her during recovery, said she couldn't ask anyone else, that I was all she had. And what kind of daughter would I be if I left her alone when she needed me? I remember sitting in her living room while she explained it all to me, and I could feel my future slipping away. But she made it sound so reasonable, so temporary. Just defer for a year, she said. The school will understand. You can start next year when I'm better. But next year never came. She recovered from the surgery, but then there was physical therapy she needed help with. Then she fell and hurt her back. Then she had anxiety that required constant supervision. There was always something, always one more reason I couldn't leave, couldn't pursue my dreams, couldn't put myself first. By the time I realized what was happening, 5 years had passed. The scholarship was long gone. The window of opportunity had closed. I was 28 years old, still working as a receptionist, still living half my life in my mother's shadow, still waiting for permission to become the person I was meant to be. My mother used to say I was too soft for the world, that I needed her to make the hard decisions. She'd say it while she was signing papers I didn't understand, while she was opening mail addressed to me, while she was depositing my paychecks into accounts I never saw statements for. She told me it was easier this way, that I'd just confuse things if I tried to manage my own affairs. And I believed her. That's the part that kills me now. I believed her. I gave up everything. Friends who wanted to take me out, I'd have to ask permission. Men who showed interest, she'd find something wrong with them. That job opportunity in Norfolk that would have doubled my income, she said it was too far, that I couldn't leave her alone. So I stayed. I stayed in Richmond, in that third-floor apartment, cooking Monday dinner and reading my Bible and pretending that this was what love looked like. There was a man once. His name was Robert. I met him at church in 1976, when I was 44 years old. He was a widower, kind and quiet, with gentle eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He asked me to dinner after a Sunday service, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The possibility of something that was mine alone. I told my mother about him that evening. She was sitting in her chair watching television, and when I mentioned Robert's name, she didn't even look at me. She just said, "Men like that are looking for someone to take care of them. You barely have time to take care of me. How are you going to manage a relationship?" But I went to dinner anyway. We went to a little Italian restaurant downtown, and we talked for 3 hours. He told me about his late wife, about his job as an accountant, about his love of old movies and jazz music. I told him about my dreams of nursing school, about the sewing I used to do, about the grandmother who taught me to make sweet potato pie. When he brought me home, he asked if he could see me again, and I said yes. I said yes because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like myself. Like the woman in that photograph, the one who smiled like she owned the world. We dated for 6 months. He'd pick me up on Saturday nights, and we'd go to movies or dinner or just drive around talking. My mother hated it. She'd be cold to him when he came to the door, would give me the silent treatment when I came home. She'd have mysterious ailments that flared up right before our dates, would need me to stay home to help her, would guilt me with tears and accusations that I was abandoning her. Robert was patient. He said he understood, that family was important, that we could work around it. But my mother escalated. She called his church friends and told them I was neglecting her. She showed up at my workplace crying, saying I'd left her alone all night when I'd just been out for 3 hours. She turned our whole community into flying monkeys, all of them telling me I should put my mother first, that I was being selfish, that Robert would understand if I needed to focus on family. The last time I saw Robert, he asked me to marry him. We were sitting in his car outside my apartment building, and he pulled out a small velvet box with a simple gold ring inside. He said, "I love you. I want to build a life with you. I know your mother needs you, but maybe we can figure it out together." I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to say yes. But I looked up at that third-floor window and I could see my mother's silhouette standing there, watching. And I knew that if I said yes to Robert, I'd be saying no to any peace in my life. She'd make us both miserable. She'd sabotage everything. She'd find a way to destroy it. So I said no. I gave him back the ring and I said I couldn't do it, that my mother needed me too much, that it wouldn't be fair to him. He cried. I watched this grown man cry in his car, and I wanted to take it back, wanted to say I'd made a mistake. But I didn't. I got out of the car and went upstairs, and my mother was waiting at the door with a smile on her face. She never mentioned Robert again. It was like he'd never existed, like that 6 months of happiness had been a dream I'd imagined. And I went back to my life of asking permission and reading my Bible and pretending that sacrifice was the same thing as love. The neighborhood was changing even then. Old row houses getting bought up, turned into something shiny and new. But our buildings stayed the same. Public housing doesn't change much. You watch the world move forward through your window and you stay still. That's how it felt anyway. Watching other people's lives happen while mine sat in that apartment, waiting for permission to begin. My mother kept the important documents in a locked filing cabinet. Birth certificates, social security cards, the deed to the apartment. She said it was safer that way, that I might lose them. I was 53 years old, had worked the same job for 28 years, never lost a day to irresponsibility, but she treated me like I couldn't be trusted with my own paperwork. I'd make that sweet potato pie on Sundays sometimes, if she was in a good mood. If she wasn't, she'd say I was wasting electricity running the oven, wasting money on butter and sugar. So I learned to read her moods, to time my small joys around her disposition. That's no way to live. Measuring out your happiness in teaspoons, hoping nobody notices you taking a little bit for yourself. The faith part was complicated. I believed God wanted me to honor my mother, and she reminded me of that commandment often. Honor thy father and mother. She'd quote it when I questioned her, when I dared to suggest maybe I could handle my own bank account, maybe I could go to that church social without checking in first. The Bible became another lock on my cage, another reason to accept what was happening. But winter nights, when she was asleep and I was alone with my reading glasses and that worn Bible, I'd read other passages too. The ones about freedom, the ones about truth, the ones that said you shouldn't be a prisoner in your own life. I think some part of me knew, even then. Some part of me was waiting for permission to save myself. Then came the day everything changed. It was February, cold enough that my breath fogged up the kitchen window when I washed dishes. I was looking for insurance papers. My mother had asked me to find them, which was rare. Usually she handled everything, but she was in bed with what she said was the flu, so she told me which drawer to check in her desk. I found the bank statements first, statements for accounts I didn't know existed, accounts with my name on them, from my job, from my paychecks over the years. The numbers didn't make sense at first. I had to read them 3 times before my brain could accept what I was seeing. $50,000. Gone. Withdrawn over the years in amounts small enough that I wouldn't notice. Large enough to add up to a fortune I never knew I had. I remember sitting down right there on the floor next to her desk, still holding those papers. The carpet was worn beige, rough under my palms. I could hear my mother coughing in the other room, that fake cough she'd perfected over the years. The one that meant she needed attention, needed me to bring her tea, needed me to stop whatever I was doing and focus on her. But I couldn't move. I was reading through the statements again, trying to understand. One withdrawal for $300 here, $500 there, $1,000 once when I'd gotten a bonus at work I never knew I'd received. The dates went back years, decades. I traced them back to 1968, the year after my father died. She'd been doing this from the very beginning. There were other papers in that drawer too. A statement for an account in her name only, showing deposits that matched the withdrawals from mine. Receipts for things I'd never seen, never benefited from. A vacation to Florida I'd never taken. Furniture I'd never used. Even a car payment for a vehicle I'd never known she owned. She'd built an entire secret life with money she'd stolen from me, and she'd done it while telling me every day that I was too irresponsible to have anything of my own. My hands started shaking. The same way they're shaking now, telling you this. Because it wasn't just the money. It was the realization that everything I'd believed about myself was a lie. I wasn't too stupid to manage finances. I wasn't irresponsible with money. I'd been robbed, for decades, by the person who was supposed to love me most. I kept digging through that drawer, and that's when I found the cassette tape. It was in an old envelope, yellowed with age, labeled in my father's handwriting, "For my daughter, to be opened after I'm gone." My father had died when I was 32, sudden heart attack, no time for goodbyes. My mother had handled his affairs, said there was nothing left for me, that he'd wanted it that way. I'd believed that too. The envelope was stuck to the bottom of the drawer with old tape, like she'd tried to hide it, to make sure I'd never find it. I had to peel it away carefully, afraid it might tear. Inside was the cassette tape and a folded piece of paper. My father's handwriting again, dated 3 days before he died. The note said, "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your mother found this before I could give it to you myself. I'm sorry, baby. I should have been stronger when I was alive. I should have protected you better. But I'm leaving you this so you'll know the truth. Don't let her tell you that you can't do things. Don't let her make you small. You were always the brightest light in my life. And I need you to shine, even when I'm not there to see it." I held that note and cried. Just sat there on that worn beige carpet and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. Because my father had known. He'd known what my mother was, what she would do to me, and he'd tried to warn me. But she'd hidden it away, had kept his voice from reaching me for 40 years. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the tape into the old player in the living room. I hadn't used that thing in years, didn't even know if it still worked. But it did, and my father's voice filled the room, and I started to cry before he even finished the first sentence. He said he was worried about my mother, said he knew how she was, how she'd controlled him, how she'd control me after he was gone. He said he was sorry he couldn't be stronger, sorry he couldn't protect me, sorry he was leaving me alone with her. He said he'd tried to set up accounts she couldn't touch, tried to make sure I'd have something of my own. He said, "Please, baby, don't let her convince you that you're not capable. You're the strongest person I know. Be strong enough to forgive yourself for whatever happens next." The tape kept playing. My father's voice was describing specific accounts he'd opened, account numbers, bank names, instructions on how to access them. He'd left me money, hidden it away where he thought my mother couldn't reach it. But as he talked, I realized these were the same accounts I'd just seen statements for. The same accounts my mother had somehow gained access to and drained completely. He'd tried to save me, and she'd stolen that too. I collapsed on the couch. Not a physical collapse, but something inside me just gave way. I couldn't breathe right. Couldn't think. I pulled out the photograph that had fallen from behind the tape in the envelope. It was me at 25, wearing a dress I'd sewn myself, standing in front of my first apartment. I was smiling like I owned the world, like I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. I didn't recognize that woman anymore. She disappeared somewhere between then and now, and I couldn't even remember when I'd stopped being her. When had I stopped sewing my own clothes? When had I stopped smiling like that? When had I started asking permission to exist? My mother called from the bedroom, asking what I was doing, why I was making noise. Her voice sounded different now. Not like a mother, like a jailer. I sat there on the couch with my father's voice still echoing in my ears, with those bank statements in my lap, with that photograph of who I used to be, and I couldn't answer her. I couldn't move. I stayed on that couch until morning. My mother eventually got up, saw me there, saw the papers, saw the tape player. She didn't say anything, just went back to her room and closed the door, like she knew, like she'd been waiting for this moment, and now it had finally come. I was 70 years old, sitting in a cold apartment in Richmond, Virginia, holding proof that my entire adult life had been built on lies. And I didn't know what to do with that information. I didn't know how to be the woman in that photograph again. I didn't even know if I wanted to be. My granddaughter came to visit that week. She was 17, sharp as a tack, studying to be a lawyer. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "What happened to you, Grandma?" Just like that. Simple question. But nobody had asked me that in so long. I showed her everything, the tape, the statements, the photograph. She listened to my father's voice, and I watched her face change. She got angry. Not at me. For me. And that felt strange because I'd been so angry at myself for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to have someone else be angry on my behalf. She sat down next to me on the couch, and she held my hand while we went through every single paper together. She made notes in a little notebook she carried, writing down dates and amounts and account numbers. She asked me questions I didn't have answers to. When did this start? Did you ever see any of these statements? Did she ever explain where this money went? I felt so stupid sitting there, admitting over and over that I didn't know. I hadn't seen. I hadn't asked. But my granddaughter just squeezed my hand and said, "This isn't your fault, Grandma. None of this is your fault. People who do this. They're professionals at manipulation. They know exactly what they're doing." She asked me if I wanted to report it to the police, if I wanted to pursue criminal charges. And I couldn't answer, because the person who did this was my mother. My 86-year-old mother who was sleeping in the next room, who'd raised me, who I'd taken care of for years. How do you send your own mother to jail? But my granddaughter looked at me with these steady eyes, and she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Grandma, how long are you going to let her steal from you? She's already taken your money, your time, your dreams. Are you going to let her take the rest of your life too?" That question sat between us in the silence of that apartment, and I didn't have an answer. Not then. She said, "This is elder financial abuse, Grandma. There are laws, people who can help. You don't have to live like this." Elder financial abuse. The words sounded clinical, official, real, like this thing that had been happening to me had a name, like it happened to other people too. Like maybe I wasn't uniquely stupid or weak, maybe I was just one of many. But I was scared. My mother was still in the next room, still had all the documents, all the control, all the power. I'd spent decades being afraid of her, and you don't just stop being afraid because someone tells you that you can. My granddaughter held my hand and said, "You're not alone in this. I'm here. We're going to fix this together." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But belief is hard when you've been told your whole life that you're not capable of being believed. She helped me anyway. Started making phone calls, finding resources, people who dealt with this kind of thing. She found an accountant who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. A woman named Patricia who had kind eyes and talked to me like I was smart enough to understand what had happened to me. Patricia came to the apartment. My mother stayed in her room the whole time. But I could feel her listening, feel her presence like a weight in the air. Patricia looked at the bank statements, listened to the tape, took notes. Then she looked at me and said, "You've been systematically financially abused for approximately 40 years. We can pursue this legally, but I need to be honest with you about something first. The statute of limitations on most of this has passed. The evidence is old. The money has been spent and moved around so many times that tracing it will cost more than you'd recover. Your mother is elderly and would likely claim incompetence or confusion. The courts might not rule in your favor." So that was it then. She'd taken everything, and there was no way to get it back. No legal justice, no fairy tale ending where the bad guy pays and the good guy wins. But Patricia said something else too. She said, "That doesn't mean you can't be free. Justice isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about taking back your life." My granddaughter sat beside me, holding my hand, and I thought about that woman in the photograph, the one who sewed her own dresses and smiled like she had a future. Maybe I couldn't get the money back, but maybe I could get her back. I made a decision right there. I was going to my mother's apartment, not the one we shared. She'd moved into a nicer place by then, bought with my money, though I hadn't understood that at the time. I was going to confront her in her own space, with my father's voice as my witness. The days leading up to that confrontation felt like walking through fog. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly. I'd stand at the kitchen window watching cars go by on the street below, wondering what I was going to say, how I was going to say it. I practiced conversations in my head, imagined her reactions, tried to prepare myself for every possible outcome. My mother acted like nothing had changed. She'd get up in the morning, make her coffee, watch her shows, tell me what to cook for dinner. Like I hadn't found the evidence. Like she hadn't seen me sitting on that couch with her crimes spread out around me. The pretense was almost worse than the abuse. At least before, I hadn't known it was pretense. My granddaughter drove me there on a Saturday afternoon. Winter sun coming through the windshield, everything bright and cold. I had the tape player in my lap, those bank statements in a folder, that photograph in my pocket. My heart was beating so hard I thought I might pass out. "Are you sure you want to do this?" my granddaughter asked me as we pulled up to the building. "We can turn around right now. We can find another way." But I shook my head. There was no other way. I needed to look my mother in the eye and tell her that I knew, that I'd always matter more than her comfortable lie. My mother's building was nice. Brick facade, little balconies, heat that actually worked. She'd moved there 5 years ago, said she needed her own space. I'd helped her move, carried boxes, set up her furniture. Never questioned how she could afford it on her Social Security. Never thought to ask. The lobby had marble floors that clicked under my shoes. There was a doorman who smiled and asked if I needed help finding the apartment. So polite, so professional. It was the kind of building I dreamed about living in when I was younger, before I learned to stop dreaming about things like that. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. My granddaughter stood next to me, solid and certain, and I drew strength from her presence. The hallway was carpeted, muffling our footsteps, numbered doors on either side, lives I'd never know happening behind them. She opened the door like she knew I was coming. Maybe she did. Maybe she'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. I walked into her living room and I set up the tape player. She sat in her chair, arms crossed, face blank, and I played it. My father's voice filled that room, talking about his worry, his fears, his hope that I'd be strong enough to forgive myself. When it finished, the silence was so thick I could barely breathe through it. My mother looked at me and said, "I did what I had to do. That money was safer with me. You would have just thrown it away." Just like that. No apology, no shame, just justification. I said, "You stole from me. For 40 years. You made me believe I was incompetent so you could control me." She said, "I was protecting you." "From what?" I asked. "From having my own life?" She didn't answer that. Just sat there in her nice apartment, surrounded by furniture I'd helped her buy, wearing clothes I'd helped her pay for, and she looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. I pulled out the bank statements and put them on her coffee table. I said, "I know about all of it. Every account, every withdrawal, every lie. I know." She glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. She said, "What are you going to do? Sue me? I'm 86 years old. I'm your mother. You think anyone's going to care about some money from decades ago?" And that's when I realized she was right. Not morally right, but practically right. The law wasn't going to help me. Public opinion wasn't going to help me. Even my father's voice on that tape wasn't going to change what had already happened. But I could change what happened next. I stood up. I said, "I'm taking back the deed to my apartment. I'm taking back all my documents. I'm taking back my Social Security card, my birth certificate, everything you've been holding on to. And if you refuse, I'll tell everyone. Every relative, every friend, every person at your church. I'll tell them exactly what you did." She laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "Nobody will believe you. They'll think you're senile, confused. They'll think I'm the victim here, dealing with a difficult daughter." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll still tell them. And every time they look at you, they'll wonder. Every time you ask them for something, they'll remember what I said. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if people believe me or believe you. Is that how you want to live?" Her face changed then. Just a little. Just enough that I knew I'd touched something real. My granddaughter stood up then too, and she pulled out her phone. She said, "And I'll post it online, Grandma's story. With copies of the documents, with the recording of great-grandpa's voice. The whole world will know what you did. Your church friends will see it. Your neighbors will see it. Everyone." My mother's eyes went wide. She said, "You wouldn't dare." My granddaughter smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. She said, "Try me." That's when my mother's confidence cracked. Just a hairline fracture. But I saw it. She understood that the world had changed, that her secrets weren't as safe as they used to be, that a 17-year-old girl with a phone could do more damage to her reputation than any lawsuit ever could. I said, "I don't want your apologies. I don't want explanations. I want my documents, and I want you out of my life. You can keep the money. Keep this apartment. Keep everything you stole. But you don't get to keep me." I walked out. My granddaughter was waiting in the car, and when I got in, I started crying. Not sad crying, something else. Relief, maybe, or grief, or both. We sat there in the parking lot for a long time. She didn't try to make me stop crying, didn't try to fix it. Just sat there with me while I let 40 years of buried emotion pour out of me in that cold car on a winter afternoon. When I could finally breathe again, she said, "I'm proud of you, Grandma." And I realized I was proud of me too. For the first time in longer than I could remember. My mother sent the documents 3 days later, delivered by a cousin who didn't ask questions, just handed me a manila envelope and left. Everything was there. The deed to my apartment, my social security card, my birth certificate, account information for the small amount of money she hadn't already taken. Even the Singer sewing machine. She sent that too, like she was cleaning house, getting rid of evidence. But here's the thing about justice. I didn't get my money back. The accountant was right about that. My mother kept everything she'd taken, and she kept it until she died 3 years later. She never apologized, never admitted she'd done anything wrong, never faced any legal consequences for what she'd done to me. But I got something else, something that might matter more. I started cooking only what I wanted to eat. That sounds small, doesn't it? But it felt like revolution. Red beans and rice on Monday because I liked the tradition, sure. But also fried chicken on Tuesday and pancakes for dinner Wednesday if I wanted them. Nobody telling me I was wasting money, doing it wrong, being irresponsible. Just me in my kitchen, making food I actually wanted to eat. The first time I cooked just for myself, I stood in front of my refrigerator for 20 minutes trying to decide what I actually wanted. Not what my mother would approve of, not what was cheapest or most practical, but what I wanted. It was like my brain had forgotten how to answer that question. I ended up making scrambled eggs with cheese and toast with butter, and I ate it at 10 o'clock at night standing at the kitchen counter. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't even particularly good. But it was mine. I'd chosen it, prepared it, eaten it without asking anyone's permission or enduring anyone's criticism. And I cried while I ate those eggs, because I was 73 years old and it was the first meal I'd cooked entirely for myself in over 40 years. After that, every meal became a small act of rebellion. I bought ingredients my mother would have called wasteful. Fresh basil, imported olive oil, real maple syrup instead of the corn syrup kind. I made dishes from recipes I found in magazines, tried cooking techniques I'd only seen on television. Some of it was terrible. Some of it was wonderful. All of it was mine. My neighbors started to notice. I'd bring them plates of whatever I'd made, and they'd comment on how different I seemed. more relaxed, one of them said. Like you're finally enjoying yourself. And I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was enjoying myself. These simple moments in my kitchen, choosing and creating and tasting, they were teaching me how to be free. I made sweet potato pie from my grandmother's recipe, and I didn't apologize for it. I made it when I wanted, how I wanted, and I gave it to people who appreciated it. My granddaughter, neighbors, people at the senior center. I made pie, and I felt like myself again. The Singer sewing machine sat in my living room for 2 months before I touched it. I was afraid of it, if I'm being honest, afraid it would remind me of everything I'd lost. But one day, I just sat down at it, threaded the needle, and started sewing. My hands remembered what to do. Made a simple dress first, nothing fancy, but it fit me, and it was mine. And when I wore it, I felt like that woman in the photograph. Still here. Still capable. The first few times I tried to sew, my hands shook so badly I couldn't thread the needle. I'd sit there at that beautiful machine, holding the thread and the needle, and I'd start crying. Because it wasn't just about sewing. It was about all those years of being told I couldn't, that I wasn't capable, that I didn't have the skill or the sense to create something beautiful. I'd look at the machine and hear my mother's voice saying, "You'll just break it. You don't know what you're doing. You never finish anything you start." Her words had become my internal dialogue, the voice in my head that criticized everything I tried to do. But my granddaughter would come over and sit with me. She'd say, "Grandma, just try. What's the worst that can happen? You make a mistake? So what? It's just fabric. You can always start over." And she'd put her hand over mine, helping me guide the thread through the needle's eye. The first thing I made was a disaster. A simple pillowcase that came out crooked and uneven, with stitches that wandered like a drunk man walking home. I almost threw it away, but my granddaughter grabbed it from me and said, "This is beautiful. This is proof that you tried." And she took it home with her, and I saw her using it on her couch the next week. That pillowcase gave me courage. If I could make something crooked and uneven and still have it be valuable to someone, then maybe perfection wasn't the point. Maybe the point was just doing it. Creating something, proving to myself that my mother had been wrong about me all along. So I kept sewing. Each stitch was an act of defiance. Each finished project was proof that I was capable, that I was creative, that I had something to offer the world beyond submission and servitude. I made curtains for my windows. I made tablecloths and napkins. I made a quilt from scraps of fabric, each piece representing a different moment of my new freedom. And slowly, my hands stopped shaking. The voice in my head that sounded like my mother grew quieter. In its place, I heard my grandmother's voice, the one from my childhood, saying, "That's it, baby, you've got it. Look what you can do when you believe in yourself." I started volunteering at the senior center, just a few hours a week at first, helping with activities, talking to people. But then I noticed something. So many of the women there had stories like mine. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Adult children controlling their finances, spouses who'd isolated them, family members who treated them like children, like burdens, like their lives didn't matter anymore. I started a small group. We met on Thursday afternoons, just a handful of us at first, sitting in a circle in the community room. We called it the Second Wind Club, though really it was a support group for seniors who'd been financially or emotionally abused. We shared our stories, helped each other figure out next steps, reminded each other that we weren't crazy, weren't stupid, weren't alone. The first meeting, I was so nervous I almost canceled. I'd put up flyers around the senior center advertising the group, but I didn't know if anyone would show up. What if I was the only one? What if nobody else had experienced what I'd experienced? What if I just imagined that other people were suffering like I'd suffered, but 5 women showed up that first Thursday? 5 women who'd seen the flyer and thought, "That's me, that's my story." We sat in a circle, and for the first few minutes, nobody said anything. We just looked at each other, these strangers brought together by shared pain. Then a woman named Margaret spoke up. She was 82, tiny and bird-like, with trembling hands. She said, "My son controls my pension. I haven't seen my bank statements in 3 years. He says it's easier this way, that I don't need to worry about money." And that opened the floodgates. Another woman, Linda, said her daughter had convinced her to sign over power of attorney, then sold her house without telling her. Another woman, Rosetta, said her nephew was stealing her social security checks. Another said her husband had been emotionally abusing her for 40 years, and she just now realized that's what it was. We cried together that first meeting. Cried and held hands and told each other the truths we'd been too ashamed to speak out loud. And when the hour was up, we all sat there not wanting to leave. Because for the first time in years, maybe decades, we'd been in a room where we were believed. That's when I learned about flying monkeys. One of the women in the group, Dorothy, she used that term. She said her therapist had explained it. Flying monkeys in a family are the people who enable the abuser, the ones who make excuses, who say things like, well, you know how she is, or he doesn't mean it that way, or can't you just let it go? They're not the main abuser, but they help the abuse continue by protecting the abuser's reputation, by making the victim feel like they're the problem. My mother had flying monkeys everywhere. Cousins who'd say I was being disrespectful when I questioned her. Church friends who'd tell me I should be grateful to have a mother who cared so much. Neighbors who thought it was sweet how close we were, how much I did for her. They didn't know. Or maybe they didn't want to know. Either way, they helped keep me trapped. Understanding that changed something for me. It wasn't just my mother I'd been fighting against. It was an entire system of people who benefited from me staying small, staying controlled, staying quiet. And once I saw that system, I couldn't unsee it. I started talking about it. In my group at the senior center, in conversations with my granddaughter, with the few friends I had left, I talked about how abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum, how there are always people around it who choose not to see, who choose to look away, who choose to blame the victim instead of confronting the abuser. And the more I talked, the more people listened. Women started coming to the Thursday group who'd heard about it from a friend, or seen a flyer, or just needed somewhere safe to say out loud what was happening to them. We grew from 5 women to 12 to 20. We had to move to a bigger room. I learned that I had a gift for this, for listening, for believing people, for helping them see that what was happening to them wasn't their fault. All those years of being told I was incompetent, it turned out I was actually pretty good at understanding complicated emotional situations. I was good at seeing patterns, at asking the right questions, at holding space for pain without trying to fix it too quickly. One woman in our group, Helen, she was 85, and her daughter had been stealing from her for 15 years. She'd come to that first meeting so broken, so convinced that she was the problem. She kept saying, maybe I am too old to manage my money. Maybe my daughter is right. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. I sat across from her in that circle, and I saw myself. I saw the same doubt, the same shame, the same desperate need to believe that the person hurting you really does love you, really is trying to help. And I told her my story. All of it. The $50,000, the hidden tape, the 40 years of believing I was incompetent when really I was just being robbed. Helen cried. We all cried. But then she said something that changed everything for me. She said, if you can get free, maybe I can too. And I realized that my pain, all that suffering I'd endured, it had given me something valuable. It had given me the ability to help other people find their way out. We started meeting weekly instead of monthly. Women would bring their bank statements, their legal documents, their questions and fears. We'd help each other understand what was happening, what resources were available, what steps they could take. We created a phone tree so nobody had to face a crisis alone. We pooled our knowledge about elder law, financial abuse, protective services. One woman, Patricia, she was being financially abused by her son. After 6 months in our group, she got the courage to report him to Adult Protective Services. The investigation found that he'd stolen over $80,000 from her. He was prosecuted. He went to jail. And Patricia, she told us that our group had saved her life, that before she found us, she'd been planning to just give up, to let him take everything, because she couldn't face the truth of what he was doing to her. That's when I understood that this was bigger than me. This was about creating a community where vulnerable people could find strength, where abuse could be named and confronted, where freedom was possible even when the system failed you. Every Thursday afternoon, we were creating a small pocket of justice in a world that often ignores elder abuse, that tells old people their feelings don't matter, that they should just be grateful for any attention from family. My purpose became this: these Thursday afternoons, these women's stories, this slow, steady work of helping people take back their lives, one small decision at a time. Cook what you want to eat. Wear what you want to wear. Say no without explaining why. These tiny acts of rebellion that add up to freedom. I never got the big confrontation I sometimes fantasized about. The one where my mother breaks down crying and apologizes and admits everything. She died 3 years after I walked out of her apartment, and she died angry at me. Angry that I'd cut her off, angry that I'd told people what she'd done, angry that I'd taken back control of my life. Her flying monkeys tried to guilt me into going to her funeral, into making peace with her, into pretending that everything was fine. I didn't go. I sent flowers, I stayed home and made sweet potato pie from my grandmother's recipe, and I didn't feel guilty about it. Because here's what I understand now, what took me 73 years to learn. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes justice is just you, living your life on your own terms, making your own decisions, keeping your own money, cooking your own food. That's justice too. The apartment I live in now, it's still the same public housing unit on the 3rd floor. Still has a view of the street, still sits in a neighborhood where old buildings meet new condos, but it feels different now. It feels like mine, because I know it is. I have the deed, I have my documents, I have my own bank account that nobody else can touch. I put the Singer sewing machine by the window where the morning light comes in. I sew when I want to now, make quilts mostly, give them to people in the neighborhood who need them. Every stitch feels like taking back something that was stolen from me. Every finished quilt feels like proof that I'm still here, still creating, still capable. My granddaughter visits every Sunday. We cook together, talk about her law school classes, about the cases she's learning about. She wants to specialize in elder law, in protecting people like me. She says I inspired that. She says watching me fight back made her want to fight for other people who couldn't fight for themselves. I don't know if that's true, but it feels good to hear. Last month, a woman came to our Thursday group, and she was 78 years old, and she said almost the exact same thing I'd said in that first meeting 3 years ago. She said, I think I'm too stupid to manage money. That's what my son tells me. And I watched the other women in the circle lean forward, and I watched them tell her what I'd needed to hear all those years. You're not stupid. This is abuse. You deserve better. And I realized that this right here, this is my final destination. Not a place, not a building, not a city, just this feeling of being somewhere I can call my own. Being surrounded by people who see me, really see me, and who let me see them too. I learned something important in all of this, something I want you to understand if you're going through anything similar. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 6 seniors worldwide suffers abuse. 1 in 6. That's millions of people sitting in apartments and houses and nursing homes right now, being controlled, being stolen from, being convinced that they're the problem. And during the pandemic, research showed that number jumped to 1 in 5. 1 in 5 seniors being abused when everyone was trapped at home together. You're not alone. I need you to hear that. You're one of millions, and it's not your fault, and you don't have to stay. Even if you can't get legal justice, even if you can't get your money back, even if you can't make the person who hurt you apologize or change or face consequences, you can still leave. You can still take back your life. Understanding the role of enablers, those flying monkeys, that's crucial. Because often the hardest part isn't leaving the main abuser. It's dealing with all the people around them who tell you that you're wrong, that you're being dramatic, that you should just forgive and forget. Those people are part of the system keeping you trapped. You don't owe them explanations. You don't owe them peace. You owe yourself freedom. So here's my question for you. Have you lived this? Do you know someone who has? Are you sitting in a room right now, wondering if what's happening to you is normal? If maybe you deserve it? If maybe everyone else is right and you're wrong? Listen to me. You're not wrong. If something inside you is screaming that this isn't okay, listen to that voice. That's the voice of the person you used to be, the person you still are underneath all the control and manipulation. That person is still there, still worth saving, still capable of having a life of their own. Comment below if this resonates with you. Tell me your story, even if it's just a few words. Sometimes just saying it out loud to someone who understands, that's the first step to freedom. And please, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because somewhere out there is a woman sitting at her kitchen sink, hands shaking, holding proof that her life has been built on lies. She needs to know she's not alone. She needs to know that other people have walked this path and survived it. Your like, your subscription, it helps this message reach her. It might save her life. I'm 75 years old. I lost 40 years to someone else's control, someone else's greed, someone else's need to keep me small. But I got these last few years back. I got myself back. And every morning when I stand at this kitchen sink watching the sun come up through the window, I remember that photograph of the woman I used to be. And I smile because I know now that she never really left. She was just waiting for permission to come home. You don't need permission. You never did. You just need to start. Cook what you want to eat. Say no without explaining. Open your own bank account. Read your own mail. Make one small decision that's entirely yours. And then make another one. And another one. Freedom isn't a destination. It's a series of small choices that eventually add up to a life you can call your own. Start choosing. Today. Right now. You deserve it. You always did.